The drive home felt longer than 30 miles. I kept both hands steady on the steering wheel and let the late afternoon traffic carry me north along the highway, past gas stations and strip malls that all looked the same. I did not turn on the radio. I wanted to hear my own thoughts clearly. Every red light gave me another minute to replay the scene in the backyard, not to punish myself, but to study it. Daniel had not lost his temper. His voice had been calm, measured. That meant the moment had been chosen, not accidental. When I reached my townhouse, I carried the untouched bowl of potato salad back inside and set it on my kitchen counter. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel lonely after my husband passed, but that evening it felt steady and protective. I changed out of my blouse, folded it neatly, and sat down at my small oak desk near the window. The first thing I did was open my banking application on my laptop. Daniel had insisted on helping me set it up last year, saying he would monitor it for unusual charges. I typed in my password slowly, carefully. The balance appeared on the screen. It was not alarming at first glance, but when I clicked through recent transfers, I noticed several larger withdrawals over the past 6 months labeled as home improvement reimbursements. I had not requested any reimbursements. I had not authorized any new projects. My heart did not race. Instead, it settled into a slow, deliberate rhythm. I pulled out the folder where I kept copies of the power of attorney document Daniel had brought to me. The one he said was limited and temporary. I read every line this time, not as a trusting mother, but as a woman protecting her own future. The language was broader than I remembered. It allowed him to act on my behalf in financial matters with fewer restrictions than he had described. I thought about the way Ashley had once asked whether I planned to downsize permanently or if I might need assisted living soon. I had laughed at the time. I walked 2 miles every morning and volunteered at church twice a week. I was not fragile, but perhaps to them, I was convenient. I closed the laptop and reached for my phone. There was a number saved in my contacts that I had not used in years, the name of the attorney who handled the sale of our family home. I stared at it for a moment, then pressed call. When his receptionist answered, I scheduled an appointment for Tuesday morning. I did not mention why. I simply said I needed to review some documents and discuss my estate plan. After I hung up, I looked around my modest living room, at the framed photographs of Daniel as a little boy holding a fishing rod twice his height, at the picture of my husband smiling beside our first house. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not revenge, but resolve. If my son had decided that I belonged at the edge of his driveway, then I would make certain that my life, my money, and my dignity were firmly back in my own hands. Tuesday morning arrived bright and already warm by 9 o'clock, the kind of Texas heat that settles in early and does not leave until well after sunset. I dressed carefully in a light blue blouse and sensible heels, the same way I used to dress for parent-teacher conferences when Daniel was a boy. There is something about putting yourself together properly that reminds the world, and yourself, that you are not to be dismissed. The law office sat in a modest brick building near downtown, not flashy, not intimidating. When I walked in, the receptionist recognized my name from years ago and offered me a polite smile. I took a seat and folded my purse on my lap, feeling neither nervous nor ashamed. I was there to understand, not to accuse. When Mr. Henderson greeted me, his hair thinner than I remembered but his handshake still firm, he led me into a quiet office with shelves of neatly organized binders. I handed him the copy of the power of attorney and explained that my son had encouraged me to sign it for convenience. I kept my tone steady. I did not mention the barbecue. I did not need to. Mr. Henderson read through the document slowly, his brow tightening just slightly. After a few minutes he looked up and said, "Margaret, this grants broader authority than many parents realize." He explained that while it was not irreversible, it did allow Daniel to manage transactions with minimal oversight. I asked him plainly whether withdrawals labeled as reimbursements would require my direct approval. He answered that under this wording, they would not necessarily require additional signatures. I felt a small click inside my chest, not panic, but confirmation. I then asked what my options were. Mr. Henderson outlined them one by one in a calm, practical voice. I could revoke the existing document immediately. I could notify my bank in writing. I could update my will and establish clearer protections for my remaining assets. He emphasized that I was fully competent and well within my rights to make changes. Hearing that word, competent, settled over me like a shield. Before leaving, I signed the paperwork to revoke the power of attorney effective immediately. I also scheduled a follow-up appointment to review my estate plan in detail. When I stepped back into the parking lot, the sun felt less oppressive. I sat in my car for a moment and allowed myself a long, steady breath. This was not about punishing my son. It was about drawing a line that should never have been crossed. I drove directly to my bank branch and requested a meeting with the manager. By noon, formal notices were in motion, safeguards were being placed, and online access was being updated. Every signature I placed on those forms felt like reclaiming a small piece of ground that had quietly been taken from me. By the time I returned home that afternoon, I did not feel humiliated. I felt prepared. By Wednesday afternoon, the notifications had gone through. The bank confirmed in writing that the previous authority had been revoked and that all future transactions would require my direct approval in person or through a secure verification process that only I controlled. I placed the confirmation letter in the same oak desk drawer where I kept my late husband's watch and our original mortgage papers. Some things deserve careful storage. That evening my phone rang just after 7 o'clock. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was tight, confused. He said he had received an alert from the bank stating that his access had been removed and asked if there had been some kind of mistake. I told him calmly that there was no mistake. I explained that I had reviewed my documents and decided to manage my finances independently from now on. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough for me to picture Ashley standing nearby, listening. Daniel said he was only trying to help and that I was overreacting. I did not argue. I simply replied that help does not require secrecy and that transparency protects everyone involved. He shifted his tone then, reminding me of small favors he had done, errands he had run, as if kindness were a ledger that demanded repayment. I thanked him for those favors and said I appreciated them. Then I added that appreciation does not equal surrender. He did not like that. His voice hardened slightly, asking whether this was about what happened on Sunday. I told him it was about responsibility, not feelings. That answer unsettled him more than anger ever could. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my living room with only the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead. I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. The following morning I met again with Mr. Henderson to begin updating my will. I made deliberate decisions. A portion would go into a scholarship fund at my church in my husband's name. Another portion would be placed in a trust for my grandson, structured so that no one could access it except him when he reached a certain age. I reduced Daniel's direct inheritance to a modest amount, enough to be fair but not enough to control. These were not acts of spite. They were acts of clarity. When I left the office with the draft documents in my handbag, I understood something important. Respect is not requested in dramatic speeches. It is established through boundaries. And if my son intended to measure my worth by what he could access, he was about to learn that my value was no longer available for negotiation. The next invitation came the following Saturday in the form of a short text message from Ashley. She wrote that they were hosting another small get-together, just close friends and a few neighbors, and that it would mean a lot if I came. The wording was careful, almost polished, as if each sentence had been reviewed before being sent. I read it twice before replying that I would attend. Not because I felt obligated, and not because I had forgotten what happened the week before, but because I understood that clarity is best delivered in person. When I arrived that afternoon, the backyard looked nearly identical to the previous gathering. The grill stood in the same spot. The folding chairs were arranged in a loose circle. Laughter floated through the warm air. Daniel spotted me first. His smile appeared quickly, but it did not reach his eyes. He walked over and gave me a brief hug, the kind that feels more like a gesture than affection. He asked how I had been, and I answered that I had been productive. Ashley approached moments later, offering a sweet tone and complimenting my dress. I thanked her and took a seat at the main table this time, without waiting to be directed. No one moved my chair. No one commented. The difference was subtle, but noticeable. Plates were passed around, drinks poured, conversation started. Daniel hovered near me longer than necessary, as if trying to read my mood. I kept my voice even and spoke about neutral topics, church events, the weather, my morning walks. After about 20 minutes, Daniel leaned closer and said quietly that we should talk soon about straightening things out. I nodded and said that I agreed. Then I added that I had already begun straightening out my affairs, and that everything was now structured clearly and professionally. His expression shifted, only slightly, but enough. He asked what I meant. I told him that I had updated my legal documents and financial arrangements to reflect my current wishes. I did not elaborate. I did not accuse. I simply stated facts. Ashley, who had been listening from only a few feet away, stepped closer and asked whether that meant changes to future plans. I looked at both of them and said that it meant I had taken responsibility for my own future, which is something every adult should do. There was no raised voice, no dramatic announcement. Yet the air around us felt different, tighter. Daniel forced a small laugh and said he hoped I was not making decisions based on misunderstandings. I answered that my decisions were based on understanding, not misunderstanding. Then I lifted my glass of iced tea and took a calm sip. Around us, the party continued, but the message had been delivered. I was no longer sitting at the edge of anything. I was seated exactly where I chose to be. After that afternoon, the tone between us changed in ways that were not obvious to outsiders, but unmistakable to me. Daniel began calling more frequently, his voice carefully balanced between concern and curiosity. He asked whether I needed help with groceries, whether my car was running well, whether I had considered moving closer to them for convenience. Each offer sounded generous on the surface, yet each carried the same quiet assumption that I required supervision. I answered politely every time. I told him my car had recently passed inspection, that I still walked 2 miles every morning without difficulty, that my pantry was well stocked. I made sure my independence was not defensive, just factual. A few days later he asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. We chose a small cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived early and selected a table near the window where the late afternoon light softened everything it touched. When Daniel walked in, he looked less confident than he had in his backyard. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me, elbows on the table, hands clasped. For a moment he said nothing. Then he admitted that he had been surprised by my legal changes and that Ashley was worried about what it meant for long-term planning. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him that long-term planning begins with trust, and trust requires respect. I did not raise my voice. I did not mention the embarrassment directly. Instead, I asked him a simple question. I asked whether he believed I was incapable of managing my own affairs. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any argument could. He said he was only trying to make things easier for everyone. I replied that ease achieved through control is not ease at all. It is dependency. I reminded him that I had balanced household budgets for decades, paid off a mortgage, funded his college tuition, and navigated life after losing my husband without asking anyone to take over. I told him I welcomed support, but not authority. The distinction mattered. Daniel leaned back in his chair, absorbing that. For the first time since the barbecue, his expression softened into something closer to reflection. He said quietly that he might have misjudged how his actions appeared. I told him that appearances matter, especially when delivered in front of others. The cafe noise hummed around us, cups clinking, milk steaming behind the counter, ordinary life continuing. When we stood to leave, he hugged me again, this time lingering a second longer. I walked to my car feeling neither triumphant nor bitter. I felt balanced. I had not demanded an apology. I had not pleaded for affection. I had simply redrawn the boundaries of my own life and spoken them aloud. Whether Daniel chose to understand them fully was now his responsibility, not mine. In the weeks that followed, something subtle began to shift, not only in Daniel, but in me. I stopped waiting for invitations to feel included and began choosing where I wanted to place my time. I joined a weekday book club at church that met every Thursday morning, and I signed up for a short trip to Colorado with a group of women my age, a 5-day retreat in the mountains where the air would be cooler and the conversations deeper than backyard small talk. When I mentioned the trip to Daniel over the phone, there was a pause before he responded. He asked how much it cost. I told him the exact amount, calmly, and added that it was well within my budget. This time, he did not suggest reviewing the expense. He simply said he hoped I would enjoy it. Ashley's tone softened as well. She began asking me for recipes again, requesting the potato salad for an upcoming neighborhood gathering. I agreed to share the recipe, but I did not offer to cater the event. Boundaries, I have learned, are maintained not only through grand decisions, but through small daily choices. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel and Ashley came to my townhouse with my grandson. It was the first time they had visited me in months. I served lemonade and arranged cookies on a simple white plate. Daniel walked through the living room slowly, noticing the updated file cabinet beside my desk and the new lockbox installed inside a closet shelf. He did not comment, but I saw him observe. We sat together at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once helped him with algebra homework. My grandson asked if I would come to his school play in the fall. I told him I would not miss it for the world. In that moment, I realized something important. My relationship with my grandson did not require negotiation through his parents. It required consistency and presence. As they prepared to leave, Daniel lingered near the doorway. He looked at me with an expression that was more thoughtful than defensive. He said he had been thinking about what I told him at the cafe, about respect and responsibility. He admitted that sometimes he had allowed financial planning to blur into control. I did not rush to reassure him. I simply nodded and said that growth is uncomfortable, but necessary. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet of my home and felt no bitterness. What happened in that backyard weeks ago had been meant to diminish me. Instead, it clarified me. I no longer measured my worth by a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own, and it was steady, solid, and entirely mine. Autumn arrived gently that year, easing the Texas heat into something softer, more forgiving. The air turned crisp in the mornings, and I found myself walking a little farther than 2 miles, breathing in the change with quiet gratitude. By the time my grandson's school play approached, the tension that once lingered between Daniel and me had settled into something more honest. Not perfect, not magically repaired, but clearer. The evening of the performance, I arrived early and chose a seat near the front of the auditorium. The folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, parents whispering, programs rustling. Daniel and Ashley entered a few minutes later and spotted me immediately. This time, there was no hesitation in the way Daniel approached. He leaned down and kissed my cheek, thanking me for coming. Ashley offered a small, genuine smile and handed me an extra copy of the program. It was a simple gesture, but it was not staged. As the children filed onto the stage under bright lights, I felt something steady inside me, something that had nothing to do with legal documents or bank accounts. It was dignity restored not through revenge, but through boundaries held. When my grandson stepped forward for his single line, his voice trembling but brave, I applauded louder than anyone. After the show, we gathered in the hallway crowded with proud families. Daniel placed his hand lightly on my shoulder and said he was glad I was there. I looked at him and saw not the man standing behind a grill weeks ago, but the boy who once needed help tying his shoes. People grow in different directions. Sometimes they forget who taught them how to stand. Sometimes they need reminding. Later that night, back in my townhouse, I placed the program from the play on my coffee table beside the updated estate folder. The two items represented different parts of the same lesson. Love without boundaries invites disrespect. Boundaries without love become cold. The balance between them is where strength lives. I thought about the backyard, the empty plate, the eyes that watched to see how I would respond. What mattered was not what had been taken from my plate that day, but what I chose not to surrender afterward. I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not shrink. I adjusted. I clarified. I protected what was mine and allowed others to adjust accordingly. If my son ever wonders when our relationship changed, the answer is simple. It changed the moment I decided that my seat in this family would no longer be assigned by someone else's approval. It would be defined by my own quiet certainty. And that certainty is something no one can ever toss aside.